I let this boot cowl and these doubler patches cure overnight. The primer paint cure on them overnight. And this morning I took them up to the basement where I have all my riveting tools and set up to rivet this stuff together to put these patches on, or these doubler plates on, and the nut plates on. Well, I was going to put AN 470 AD3 rivets in these holes. They were drilled out for it, and rather than use the flathead rivets, 426s, I was going to use the 470s. And so I got to looking for them. I thought I had a bunch of them, but when I got to looking, I couldn't find any. All I could find was number 4s, and there were 3 flatheads. I finally got to looking around, and I found some number 3s. And AN 470 AD3s. Unfortunately, they're dash 5s, so they're too long for this. I'll wound up shearing them off down to about a 4. These set a lot better with the hand setter, a little bit longer than what the 426s did, than the flathead rivets did. They don't nail over as bad, so I could have them a little bit longer. So I'd set these rivets in here. Just put them in this rivet shear and set them down in there, and then I just put my fingers nails in there and then just hold them off just a little bit, shear them off, and that gives a pretty good length for those. I did 3 of those there down in the, or up in the basement, but my rivet set, my hand rivet squeezer, would only reach in that far. That was as far as it'd go. Well, I was looking at changing to the longer jaw. There's another jaw that will go a little bit deeper, but I could only go 1 more rivet, and maybe 2 at the most, with a longer jaw on there. So I'm going to have to set these with rivet setter, the air rivet gun anyway. And so I just brought everything down here to the shop to do it. Now the reason I brought it down here to the shop is because I don't have a good source of air up in the hangar. All my rivet tools and everything, rivets and everything else, were all up there, and they're all set up there. But the only thing I have up there for air is a little pancake air compressor for using nail guns and stuff, and it just doesn't seem like it puts out enough volume of air to effectively use the rivet gun. I tried it on some others and I made it work the other day, but it was tough. So I brought it down here to the shop. I cleaned up all my paint stuff and brought everything down here to the shop, and I'll go ahead and use my shop air down here, my air compressor, and put this all together down here. Right now I've got this with a mushroom head on it for setting the flathead rivets. Go ahead and take it off and put in a rivet set for the brazier head rivets. I'll go ahead and see if we can set some of these. We'll give it a try. All right. That's working pretty good. Okay, that's better. There, rivet. Okay, so whoop, there's all the bucktails, shop heads. They'll look pretty good. I don't see any I need to redo. Those are all pretty good. And there are the factory heads. So that'll be pretty good. And we'll do the other one here on this side just exactly the same way. or close to exactly the same way. Well, there's the second doubler. It went in really good too. No mistakes on that. The shop heads are all real good. No nailed over, no missed, anything like that. They all look really good. The only one I made a little bit of a mistake on was this first one that I drove over here on this side. I had a little bit too much air pressure on it. I had it set about 45 pounds, I think. Once I dropped it down to 35 pounds and everything went real well. And the only thing wrong with this one, it's not really wrong, it just burnished the anodizing off of it. The rest of them, they're not even hardly a mark on them. No smiley faces, nothing like that. It didn't even disturb the anodizing off of most of them. Well, these number 3 rivets are pretty easy to drive. They're nice and small, and you just use this number 2 gun. You can get into trouble if you hit them too soft, then you work hard in the rivet, then you have a hell of a time getting it the right size, the bucktail the right size. Now, I don't have a go no-go gauge on these to check them out, but just visually they all look pretty good. So I'm happy with those. Now we'll start on these on the nut plates, and that's going to be a little different story because those are flathead rivets. Tried a number 4 on those, but they're just too long. An AN 3-4, or a 3-4 I should say. It might work. I'll try another one. Try a little bit smaller rivet set. These are kind of hard to get in here because of the floating rivet, or the floating nut plate here. That's ugly, but it's acceptable, more or less. Okay, I'm kind of learning there on these. That one I screwed up, but it's not bad enough to drill out. The bucking bar slid off of it and kind of made a ramp on it on the other side, but it's not bad enough to... That's better. See, with his floating nut plates here, the nut plates are up in the air here, so the clecos don't fit flat on them on this side. If I put them on this side, then I can't get the rivet set in there flush or flat as well as I'd like to. And then the same thing when you start setting the rivet on this side. You set it with like the number 3 rivet, which is well, I've overset all these, but number 3 rivet just barely sticks out there far enough. It doesn't stick out above these little ears here. So anyway, we get a number 4 and it sticks out above those little ears, and you can get it started, but then you got to get in there with the rivet, the bucking bar, so you don't want to mash those ears down, otherwise this floating rivet won't float anymore. So these number 4s are a little too long. make it a pretty good sized bucktail, but they give me a little more time to make up for get the heads flat here. Those clecos in there at an angle like that kind of put those nut plates in kind of in a bind, so the holes don't, the other second hole doesn't quite line up quite right. The nut plates are all riveted on. That was kind of a chore. Not as pretty as I'd liked, but they're functional. See, I got to looking, I was worried about some of these bucktails, these setbacks here, shop heads. But once I got to looking at them, they're not as bad as I was afraid they were going to be. Some of them nailed over a little bit, and some of them, the bucket bar kind of come off of them a little bit, and they're scarred up, and you see they're not as pretty as this one's nailed over a little bit. Not as pretty as I'd like them to be, but they're functional. Now, I used, what are they, the 1097 3-4s for these, and they're actually were too long. The 3-3s would have been just right on here, but I had trouble with these setting them. For one thing, of course, the nut plates here, you got to be real careful. You can't just put a bucking bar flat on the rivet and buck the rivet because you can't squish down these cages here for these nuts. They've got to stay floating. So that's one problem. So the bucking bar's got to stay out away from them, and once you start getting down to where you're getting a good shop head, that you get down below these things, so you got to pull out there. The other thing is that I couldn't use the clecos on the front side of these to hold them on straight because I couldn't get the mushroom head in there to set the rivets to real well. That might have caused some dimpling and some problems on the other side on the face. So I put the clecos in from this side, and they don't fit flat because of this cage here for these nuts. They go in at an angle which offsets this hole here a little bit, so the rivets go in there. Some of them are hard to get in, and when they do go in, they want to go at an angle because these holes don't quite line up perfectly. Using these countersunk rivets in short ones, when you countersink and push them in there, they don't have as much of the shank of the rivet bearing in the hole as these solid rivets do, or these standard rivets do. Because of the countersink goes down in there, there's not as much meat in the hole to hold the rivets straight. So that's another disadvantage. But the real problem that I had here was that I boogered up all of these holes, the countersinks. I didn't do a very good job for some reason, and the harder I tried, when I could see I was making a mistake, I tried to correct it, I'd just make it worse. So some of these holes, the countersinks weren't lined up quite right, they were too deep. There's all kinds of problems there, and that's one of the reasons that I use the number 4 rivets, because that give me enough extra rivet that it could form in that hole and fill that hole in better. And it worked out perfect for that. It worked out real well for that. It just made it tough to make a good flat or good square bucktail on the other ends. So I didn't screw up too much. A couple places I kind of slipped off the rivet with the bucking bar, and I got little divots in there. But for the most part, everything turned out real well. All the rivets are nice and flush along here. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. I'm not real proud of my bucktails, but they're functional, and that's all we need. I've got the boot cowl top hanging up out there, ready to paint again. I cleaned it up real good with the prep sol, washed it down, and took it out there and hung it up. I mixed up another batch of this DP48 LF, and using the DP401 LF for the catalyst on it, and the instructions say to let it dwell for at least 30 minutes before you use it. And it's chilly out here. I didn't have a fire going in the stove today, so it's probably 55 degrees or so in here in the shop, so I let it sit a little bit longer. It's been about an hour since I mixed it up. So I'm going to get ready to paint it. Now the instructions say to thin this with with 1 part acetone. Is it 1 part or half a part acetone? Let me look at the instructions again here. Well, it's got 1/2, and then that's crossed out and it says 1. So anyway, you can thin it down with acetone, but just to get the consistency you want. I noticed yesterday when I was painting that I wasn't getting the atomization that I should have, and the paint is a little bit thick, so I'm going to thin it down. I think part of the problem was I just didn't have the air pressure up high enough in the line pressure for that gun. That's an HVLP gun. It does need a higher line pressure than what you use in a regular gun, I guess, because it knocks the pressure down in the gun. Oh yeah, that thinned it out. I didn't measure that out, but I didn't put 1 part in there for sure. Just put a little bit of acetone in there, so that thinned it out a lot better. Yeah, just a touch more, just for good measure. They say some is good, more is better. Just a little blob. You know, mix that in there. Oh yeah, that's better. Well, here's the upper boot cowl, all primered. I got all the nut plates in, the doubler plates in. Nice coat of primer on both sides. Well, that looks good. I'll put that away someplace for a little bit so it doesn't get boogered up. I might go ahead and put the finish coat on this in a day or two before this primer sets up too hard that you can't just spray coat on it. It's good for a week or so before you got to sand it and stuff and put another coat of primer on it, put the finish coat on it. But I'll put it away right now to keep it from getting scarred up and stuff. I'm going to leave the inside white. That'll make it a lot easier to work on the underside of the instrument panel. When you get under there, that'll reflect the light underneath there and everything and make it a lot brighter when you're under there working underneath it. So I'll tape off these holes from the back side and just spray this front side with the finish coat. And the finish coat is a PPG polyurethane yellow. It's the same color as same paint and everything, and same color as what Cub Crafters had the original airframe. But I'm going to paint, of course, this portion inside the windshield will be flat black, and I think I'm going to run flat black out over the front of it here on the top of the cowling and extend out onto the top of the engine cowling there, because that light doesn't reflect back into your eyes when you're flying. I really didn't have much of a problem with that before, but I think that'll help. So I'll probably come somewhere here outside of this is where the engine cowling will mount up right here, and then just to the outside of that is a rivet or a hinge line, and so I think I'll run from that hinge line in like that, something like that, with the flat black for this whole top, and then this portion of the outside will be the yellow, and of course the lower boot cowl and the side panels, and of course the rest of the airplane will all be that bright yellow.